Number 10. Micronesia miracle. In 2018, a passenger plane crashed into the water off the coast of Chuck Island in the Micronesia archipelago. The plane had been attempting to land at the local airport's runway when it missed and continued forward, where it crash landed in the water. Normally, this would be deadly for every last passenger on board. But something miraculous happened that day. When the plane crashed, not a single person died. Local fishing boats quickly hurried out to the scene of the disaster, where they helped to rescue all 40 passengers and 7 crew members. While 7 people did need to be taken to the hospital, only one of them was in critical condition. That being said, they did make a full recovery. How did the disaster occur in the first place? While details about the crash are limited, there was poor visibility due to weather conditions, and when coming in for landing, the plane hit the runway too late, kept going, and crashed into the water. Number 9. Coronavirus close call. A woman in Ecuador had an extremely close call with the coronavirus. Alba Mauri was 74 years old when the doctors at the hospital where she was being treated for COVID-19 marked her as dead. Her family was notified. They went to visit the hospital morgue, but did not look carefully at the body shown to them due to coronavirus safety protocols. Her distraught family told the hospital to cremate her and then send over the ashes. The family was later shocked to learn that Alba wasn't dead. The family was grieving. They supposedly had her ashes on the mantle at their house, and that was when they received a phone call from the dead woman. She had just woken up from a coma that she had been in for 3 weeks. Her family had already thought she was dead for a whole month. The hospital had somehow mixed up Alba with a different patient. She did almost die from the virus, falling into a deep coma, but she miraculously survived. The family has been attempting to determine whose ashes they are in possession of so they can notify the family of the actual deceased. They are also understandably upset with the hospital for making such a grave error. Number 8. The wrong leg. An 82-year-old man was suffering from a handful of illnesses in Austria when doctors decided he needed to undergo surgery to have his leg amputated. The leg was compromised due to infection, and without amputation, he very well could have died. So, the doctors at the Freistadt clinic booked him for surgery, then amputated his right leg. Before surgery, a mark was made on his leg to indicate to doctors which one to cut. Unfortunately, several days later, when they were unwrapping his bandages, they realized they had performed surgery on the wrong leg. He was actually supposed to have his left leg removed. So what happened next? The doctors had to book him for another surgery in which they amputated the proper leg. In the end, he had both his legs removed when he was only supposed to have one of them removed. It was a horrifying mistake. The clinic's medical director, Norbert Frisch, had to make a public apology at a news conference. It's a miracle that the old man survived having both his legs taken by the doctors. The hospital was shocked and dismayed by their error and offered psychological support to this ill and elderly man who will now have lost both legs. This story is tragic, but it's not the first time that a hospital has made this kind of error, though it is extremely rare. Number 7. Russian plane fire. At a Russian airport in Sochi, 18 people were injured and one first responder died after a horrifying plane incident in which the vehicle caught on fire. It was a Boeing 737 flying in from Moscow with a total passenger count of 164, as well as 6 crew members. The plane made its descent okay, but as it landed on the runway, the pilot made a grave error. The plane spun off the end of the runway, crashed into a riverbed, and burst into flames. Luckily, all of the passengers did survive with only a small fraction suffering injuries. The only fatality was a first responder who unbelievably suffered from a heart attack while in the process of rescuing the people on board. The heroic first responder succumbed to his heart attack at the scene, while the passengers and crew involved in the plane crash all survived. Number 6. Waking up in the morgue. Yet another bizarre incident in Russia, this time in the Far East. A man was out drinking vodka with his friends when he suddenly passed out. They phoned an ambulance, the paramedics arrived, and they declared the man dead. presumably from alcohol poisoning, though the reason given for declaring him dead was unclear. The paramedics took his body into their ambulance, drove him to the morgue, and he was placed in a mortuary freezer. But on this particular night, the morgue happened to be filled up completely. Bodies were filled on the shelves, so several had to be placed on the floor of the freezer, including this gentleman. According to police spokesman Alexei Stoyev, at some point during the night, the supposed dead man woke up. He simply woke up from being extremely drunk, so much so that the paramedics had thought he had died. But for this poor guy, what a place to awaken. As he realized what was happening, he was able to scream for help and get the attention of the mortuary guard, who let him out of the freezer. After he left the morgue, this hard partier stumbled back to where the paramedics had originally been called to rescue him. His friends were still partying and drinking, as they were mourning his death. So he sat down and had a drink with them. What would you do if you woke up in a freezer full of corpses? Would you go back to hang out with your friends and have a drink? Or just go home and go to bed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Number 5. 10 years in the jungle. A man named Karapiru was born into the nomadic community of hunter-gatherers known as the Awa back in the 1940s. At the time, the Awa had never before been contacted by outsiders. This was a literal tribe of jungle primitives, living off the land with no idea that the outside world even existed. But this was a changing time in the Brazilian rainforest. By the 1970s, a railroad had been built through the Awa's territory, and settlers from the modern part of the country were moving in to exploit resources. These settlers hated the indigenous tribes, so they usually killed them. They set traps, ambushed them with guns, and shot them down, and things of that nature. Karapiru was involved in one of these ambushes. He saw his entire family get gunned down by Brazilian farmers. Then, to save his own skin, he ran off into the jungle. Fearing that the farmers would hunt him down and kill him, he wandered through the Brazilian Amazon for 10 full years. He ate monkeys, he hunted fish, and he lived a solitary existence. His survival was something of a miracle. He wandered so far through the jungle that he eventually emerged on the other side, stumbling upon a settled area of farmers. They took him in and reintroduced Karapiru into civilization. Shortly after, he contracted COVID-19 and died. 10 years struggling to survive in the jungle, and then killed by the same pandemic that has devastated populations around the world. Tragic. Number 4. Stabbed at a haunted house. At a haunted house in Ohio, an 11-year-old boy is lucky to be alive after he was stabbed almost to death. This happened near Halloween at the 7 Floors of Hell haunted house, located on the Cuyahoga County Fairgrounds. It's one of the creepiest haunted houses anywhere in the USA, with the actors taking their job extremely seriously. They are charged with freaking out the guests to the best of their abilities. But one actor, by the name of Christopher Pogozelski, took his job a little too seriously. He was trying to scare the young boy with a knife that was supposed to be a prop. According to what the boy's mother said to the Washington Post, he told the actor that he wasn't afraid because he knew his knife was fake. In response, the man stabbed him in the foot with his knife, which turned out to be real. The child suffered a serious cut to his left toe, almost severing it. Christopher was then arrested by the police and charged with negligent assault. Once under arrest, Christopher told the cops that he brought his own knife from home because he felt that fake weapons weren't effective enough to be scary. While being dedicated to the job is usually a quality to admire, this guy didn't seem to understand boundaries. Stabbing and injuring a child for a more authentic scare? Yikes. Number 3. Foreign snake. After traveling 4,500 miles, the deadliest snake in the entire world just about killed a stonemason in the UK. The deadly serpent had been a stowaway inside a container of rocks shipped in Corton in Essex, all the way from India. Somehow, while these rocks were being loaded into the huge steel container, the venomous reptile slipped in as well. It then traveled halfway around the world inside the container. When the container was dropped off in the United Kingdom, At a stone quarry where workers were waiting to unload the rocks, it slithered out to say hello. One of the stonemasons at the quarry noticed the 2-foot-long reptile and walked over and picked it up. He called the authorities to let them know he found a bizarre animal. When the police showed up, he was still walking around and holding the snake. The police told him it was dangerous, so he put it in a box. But here's the deal. This was a saw-scaled viper, an extremely aggressive and vicious snake with potent venom. If a person is bit by one of these vipers, they usually suffer an excruciating death. Its venom causes the internal organs to rot, leading to a slow and painful end. The only reason it didn't bite the stonemason was that it had been so cold from its journey across the world. The snake was too lethargic to strike, which is likely what saved the man's life. I imagine he was pretty shocked when he realized just how close to a painful death he had just been. Number 2. Close call for the lion tamer. At a Russian circus, a lion tamer is lucky to be alive after a brutal attack from one of his lions. During the show, the lion tamer had 2 lionesses wrestling in the middle of the ring. People in the crowd were drinking and cheering. The ringleader was lashing the lions with his whip. Everything was going according to plan. But suddenly and without warning, one of the lionesses turned on him. Her name is Bega, and she turned and pounced on the lion tamer so quickly that he didn't have time to react. Perhaps she'd had enough of the whip, but Bega sunk her teeth into the lion tamer right there in front of the audience. From this point, it was absolute pandemonium. There was a pregnant woman in the crowd who was so shocked by what she was witnessing, then she had a seizure. As this woman was seizing in the crowd, the lion tamer was desperately trying to get away from this wild beast that was still biting him. He did eventually manage to get away from the lion with the help from other members of the circus. Then, according to the New York Post, he was sent to the nearest hospital with serious injuries. While at the hospital, the injured lion tamer told the press that it wasn't the lioness's fault. He said, and I quote, "Animals are animals." Number 1. The Andes Cannibals. Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 crashed into the Andes Mountains back in October of 1972. The flight was carrying 45 passengers and crew, with 19 of them belonging to a Christian rugby team. The wreckage was at an elevation of 11,700 feet in an extremely remote part of the mountains in Argentina. There was nowhere for these people to go. 3 crew members and 8 passengers died right away, and a few more died in the following days, leaving a small handful of surviving passengers. Search efforts were called off just after 8 days of looking, with the authorities presuming all passengers were dead. But they weren't. For 72 days, the survivors suffered from exposure, starvation, and the trauma of their situation. Many of them actually resorted to eating the bodies of their fellow passengers just to survive. They weren't rescued until 2 of the survivors hiked for 10 days through the mountains, sometimes reaching elevations of over 15,000 feet to find help. They ended up traveling 38 miles before they finally located civilization. They then managed to organize a rescue effort, with the authorities going to pick up the rest of the survivors. In the end, it became known as the Miracle of the Andes. A total of 16 survivors were rescued. And yeah, by that point, they had all been forced to resort to cannibalism to survive. What's your greatest survival story? Tell me all about it in the comments, and remember to subscribe for more awesome videos. Thanks for watching, and see you all again soon.